Today we're talking about an introduction to statistics, specifically statistical measures. And when we talk about statistics, this is the science of collecting, organizing, analyzing, and interpreting data. So the first thing I want you to do is just go ahead and fill in that vocabulary word for statistics. It's on your yellow sheet there. So it's the science of collecting, organizing, analyzing, and interpreting data. So this is all about just collecting data and then just taking a look at it. You will have a big end of the year project in which you will collect data yourself and analyze and interpret that. Okay, so today our main goal is to decide whether a question is a statistical question. So by the end of today, we should have an idea of what that is. So we're going to use some data to find our heart rate. And when we talk about the data we're collecting, this is all going to be different. We're all going to have different data points. So if you're working on this at home, you can just kind of follow along here, but here in class, we're all going to have some different data points. And then we're going to fill in this ratio table so you can collect your heartbeat and then fill in the ratio table accordingly. And this is on your yellow or your handout. This is activity 9.1 at the top. And then what we're going to do with that data is we're going to make a line plot. So here's an example of a line plot. This would be a line plot showing the hours spent on homework per week. So you can see all the hours are listed there, and you just put a dot for every data value that you have. So when we create our line plot here in class, it's going to be based off of the data values that we collect. And to find the number of values in your data set, those of you at home, since you do not have the data values here in class, you are welcome to just use this line plot example, and you can count the dots that you see there. The next question asks, do the heart rates cluster around a particular value? So in this case, if you were to look at the cluster, I would say between 1 and 6, that's kind of where most of your dots are. Those would be the clusters. It's where it's just all grouped together. The next question asks if there are any peaks or gaps. Well, if you think about a peak, it's like a mountain peak, that highest point. And you can see the dots extend up to the highest point where there's the 1. And then gaps would mean there's kind of where there's no dots, there's just kind of a hole. So there's nothing at 7, there's nothing at 10. So those would be gaps. And then are there any unusual heart rates that are far removed? So in this case, are there any unusual dots on this particular dot plot? Maybe the 9 is kind of pushing it, but there's nothing super out of the range here. So you're not always going to have a peak. You're not always going to have a data point that's far removed. But what we want to look at here is if I were to answer this question, what's the heart rate of 6th grade students? Or in your case, at home, you would say, how many hours are spent on homework a week? Okay, so what I want you to do is just look at that line plot and then just give me an answer. What would you say and why? Maybe you would say 1 because that's your peak. Maybe you would say 3 or 4 because that's in the middle of your cluster. But just give me your reasoning. And then that's what we're going to focus on this week is how do we give an answer when we have multiple data points here. So if you go ahead and flip your sheet over, the next part asks, let me make that bigger. The next part does ask, well, what if I asked you these two questions? What is your heart rate? Okay, or based on the line plot of the homework, how many hours a week do you spend on homework? And then how many hours a week do 6th grade students spend on homework? Your answer could be the same for both questions, but the answers themselves could be different, right? Because we're all going to have different answers. So in part 2, looking at your sheet here, part 2, it says to answer each question below on your own. So number 1, what is your shoe size? Go ahead and fill that in. Number 2, how many states are in the U.S.? How many brothers and sisters do you have? And how tall are you? Okay, so if you were here in class and you were to compare this with somebody next to you, you'll probably have different shoe size. Okay, you'll probably have a different amount of brothers and sisters. We're all different heights. But number 2, we all should have said there are 50 states. So that's where we're going to have 3 questions that are all going to be different, but 1 question we're all going to get the same answer. So in part B, it says some of these questions are considered statistical. Those would be questions 1, 3, and 4. Since we're all going to get different answers, we're going to get a set of data points or data values that we can organize, that we can analyze. interpret. But with number 3 or number 2, we're all going to say 50. We don't have any data to organize. So we would say that numbers 1, 3, and 4 are all statistical. So when we talk about a statistical question, going back to our vocabulary, okay, here on the second one down, statistical question, you can go ahead and fill in that that is a question for which you do not expect to get a single answer. So at the end of the year, I'm kind of alluding to this project you're going to have. Part of that is you are going to come up with a statistical question that you can collect data from. You can analyze, interpret, organize that data. So it's a question you're not going to get a single answer from. You're going to get multiple answers, like how many brothers and sisters do you have? And we're all going to have a different answer here in our classroom. Once you have gone through this and you've kind of just thought through what a statistical question is, you can go ahead and start the homework. There are just 3 questions there. And then if you get that done and you have some time left, I did post this vocabulary PowerPoint. I did post this in Google Classroom, so you can get a head start on that as well.